again to Melanie Coburn for joining us on a really, obviously, exciting day as we continue to steamroll towards the eventual sale of the Washington Commanders, with Dan Snyder finally, Lord willing, leaving. But also, I would say for Melanie and the work that her crew has put in, like a little bit of a trepidatious day, a day where, Friday, and obviously as we continue on all of these days, a time, let's call it, where we don't know exactly what is next for the transparency and accountability pieces. It is certainly one thing for Dan to have to sell the team, something he never wanted to do, but this is a man who's about to make $6 billion and keep most of it. And that in itself is not exactly punishment, even if it's not what he would like to do. So at the very least, exposing what happened, I think, would be some level of punishment, because it also establishes the truth for the record of posterity. Like what actually happened and how do we make sure that we prevent it in the future? All of those things are completely relevant questions. One of the people who is seeking to answer that is Don Van Natta, who joined us Friday on the heels of his report that the Commanders' current owner for the next little bit here until the sale goes final is trying to squash the Mary Jo White report the best he can, whether he's able to squash it entirely, squash certain parts, etc. Obviously, when we talked to Don, we didn't know that the sale agreement was about to happen. Don was on with the Sports Junkies this morning here on the Team 980 and was asked many of the same questions with an extra weekend to dig, and obviously now we see what the answers are. So, Van Natta first asked by the Junkies about kind of the status of the Mary Jo White report, and that's ultimately leading to where do we go from here.
He doesn't have much leverage, and our story reflects that. We had multiple sources tell us that, Mary Jo White's report, it appears her work is all but done, and there isn't a lot of leverage that Snyder has. He's selling the team, and yet he was still pushing for this. He wants a result similar to what happened with Beth Wilkinson's investigation. You guys will remember that in July of 2021, there was just a sort of list of findings, very broad, not very specific, released by the NFL on July 2nd, by the way, of 2021, going into a July 4th holiday weekend. And that's when Snyder agreed to step away from the team for a number of months. He wants that kind of result from Mary Jo White's report, but our understanding is he's not going to get it. There's going to be findings of some kind. And Lisa Banks, who I know you guys know, the lawyer for the former cheerleaders and former employees, was on the record on our story saying, if these findings are released, she wants to make sure they are not truncated, watered-down version of the findings similar to the Wilkinson investigation. She says that will be a big problem. So there's a lot of pressure being brought to bear on the NFL here and on Roger Goodell that Mary Jo White's report be released completely, or at the very least, complete findings be released when her report is concluded.
So I think the biggest thing there that Don says that I will underscore and stress is that Snyder has now lost essentially all leverage. When you've signed the deal and you've submitted it for approval, you can't back out. So the question I have that I don't think anybody really knows yet is what was agreed upon to get to the point they got to on Friday. What implicit or explicit agreements exist to wait on the report, to release the report in a certain way, timing, certain matters not included, all of these things. What Dan cannot do is say, well, I'm just not going to sign the agreement, because he signed it. He gave away that piece of leverage, which technically he still had, but as Don noted, he didn't have a whole lot of leverage, because if he had continued to mess around, he would have gotten voted out and they would have pushed this thing through. The other thing that Don mentions there that I think is worth underscoring is the NFL is now between a rock and a hard place, because the NFL is between Snyder, who doesn't want it to come out, and Lisa Banks and Deborah Katz, who are like, if it doesn't come out, we're going to have problems, which you don't want lawyers saying, hey, we're going to have problems when they're not. I mean, you don't want any lawyer, someone else's lawyer or your lawyer, to say, hey, we're going to have problems. But you certainly don't want to set yourself up for a lawsuit. And by the way, Mary Jo White, as she told Melanie and Melanie told us, and we've heard this from many other people, in it, whether it's reports or people that talk to Mary Jo White, was pretty adamant that, like, I'm not doing a sham investigation here. If we're doing this, like, I'm going to release something. And so the NFL is now between that rock and hard place. And thus the question, will this report even come out at all? Here's Van Natta this morning here on the Team 980 with the Junkies.
That was the ask. That's been the ask. Is that you bury it, or look, you're getting what you want. The NFL has wanted him to sell the team. They have wanted to be rid of him for quite a long time. And so the leverage is, I'm going to go forward with this. If you either minimize the findings, bury it, whatever language you want to use, water it down, make it similar to the Beth Wilkinson findings. And, as we saw Friday, just a few hours after Seth and I dropped this story with all these details about these discussions that are going on, the announcement came out that the sale is going forward. But as I said to you guys earlier, and I was saying this Friday afternoon as well, this is a separate issue from the sale. The sale agreement is between Dan Snyder and the Josh Harris Group.
Right.
This issue on Mary Jo White's report now is really between the NFL and Dan Snyder. And I believe those discussions are going to continue. Look, the NFL also has something to lose here. There's optics here. Why didn't the NFL do anything more about the allegation dating all the way back to 2009? What did they know about that? So there's some management here on the part of the NFL as well. They want all this stuff to just go away, but Roger Goodell has told us repeatedly, and he's also testified before Congress, that Mary Jo White's findings are going to be released. And it's our understanding, too, guys, I wanted to tell you this. I heard over the weekend, people have heard from Mary Jo White that she is insisting that her complete findings be made public by the NFL. Now, she works for the NFL, right? She's the attorney for the NFL. But she wants her work released because those are the assurances that she and her attorneys have made to these witnesses. They were very, very concerned that it was going to be a repeat of the Beth Wilkinson investigation. They didn't want that. And these women who stepped forward have been assured that their allegations of whatever the findings are that Mary Jo White concludes, that those findings be made public.
Something that we talked about with Don on, on Friday was that, are there legal ramifications potentially, right? If you guaranteed something for participation and then you don't come through, aka Mary Jo White and the NFL promised a written report and then it doesn't come through for Melanie Coburn. I'll use Melody since she just talked about this on the show. It doesn't come through for her participation. Is there a legal recourse there? And Lisa Banks has intimated, and we'll reach out to Lisa as this thing continues to go and try to have her on the show to say, like, is there a statute that, not saying you will, not saying you're threatening, you're not blackmailing, but, like, is there a possibility that exists for you to sue the NFL, sue Goodell for false promises, essentially? I mean, it's a private investigation. It's one the NFL paid for. They ultimately are the client here. Mary Jo White is doing it, but I don't know. I truly, honestly don't know what the rules are there, and I'm sure the rules are flexible. If there's a signed written agreement and they break it, well, that's a breach of contract. That's pretty straightforward. If there's kind of a verbal agreement between the investigator and the lawyers, then maybe there's some more gray area there. I don't know. But ultimately, I think the question remains, does this report come out, and what happens if it does? Those are questions we'll answer next. Hear more from Don Van Natta. The Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always alive as well on the free Odyssey app. A new report from Albert Breer at SI sheds a little more light on the Commander sale process and some of the issues that still remain. We'll get to that here in just a few moments. Howard Beck joins us at the top of the hour talking NBA as well. However, we continue with the fallout from Friday's ESPN report by Don Van Natta, who joined us on Friday, joined the Junkies this morning. Of course, a fairly significant thing happened in between. Dan Snyder announced for the first time, like, yes, I am actually selling the Washington Commanders to Josh Harris and company. So what happens now with the Mary Jo White report? The report that, according to Don and his colleague Seth Wickersham, Dan Snyder was trying to bury in any way he could, whether he could put it completely underground, whether He could put a lot of dirt on it and ultimately not have the most damaging parts to him see the light of day. What happens now? And is there a chance that no report comes out? Here was Don Van Natta this morning with the Junkies after, of course, when we talked to Don on Friday, we didn't have this announcement. Don has been continuing to report, I would guess, all weekend. So here's Don's best guess on what happens now.
Around the league, nearly unanimously, from what the people that Seth and I have spoken with, they want Snyder gone. So again, remember, we had a lot of discussion for months about whether there would be a vote taken and whether 24 of the 32 owners would vote him out. That's a bridge too far because that's an unprecedented action. The NFL owners are getting the much more viable option in their mind is that Snyder is going on his own and selling. But this is the thing that's so odd about this. Snyder's people have been pushing for this over the last few weeks, very strong that this Mary Jo White findings be minimized. And we had somebody who's even close to Snyder give us that quote that you just read. His odds of burying the report are the same as his odds of trading for Patrick Mahomes. It's not going to happen. Now it's really where in the middle is this going to land? On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the complete report being released, 1 being or 0 being that the report is completely buried and there's nothing, is it going to be somewhere in the middle of 5 or a 6 where findings are released? It's a little bit more detailed than Wilkinson, than what they did with the Beth Wilkinson report, and is that where we'll end up, and will that satisfy people enough? But people are watching carefully, as I said. The attorneys for these women are really holding the NFL's feet to the fire that a complete report or something very, very close to it be released by the NFL when Mary Jo White's done with her work.
And it also should be noted that Don reported that Mary Jo White is basically done with her work. Like this is very close to coming out. It also should be noted that as far as the Washington Post reported, and Don certainly doesn't have any information that he's put out in any of his reporting counter, Snyder has refused to participate in this report. And so my guess is what happens is a findings report comes out from Mary Jo White. It is scant on details, and the NFL will say that is to protect those who testified. It is enough that Lisa Banks and Deborah Katz might, and also it should be pointed out, Brendan Sullivan is the attorney for the woman who accused Dan Snyder of sexual assault on the plane in 2009. He is also a big, gigantic, powerful attorney who will not go quietly if he thinks his client was wrong. So it should be noted that he is a factor here as well. And while Banks and Katz have done a lot publicly, Sullivan's the kind of guy that would sue the NFL and be like, let's go. You want to play? We'll play. Not that Katz and Banks won't, but a lot of their stuff is, obviously providing legally sound, PR on some level and making sure that their clients are treated fairly. And if they're not, then the ability to sue and do more lawyery stuff. But so much of law and the kind of stuff that we're talking about here, it winds up being PR, and that's how you ultimately get settlements and things like that in a lot of cases unrelated to the NFL. Anyway, that was a whole legal sidebar, but to point out, like, Brendan Sullivan's a bigwig as well, and he is someone that is lurking in the background of all of this with perhaps the thing that could be the most damaging to Snyder personally. My guess is there is as little detail as possible, but enough to cover their asses at the NFL. And ultimately, people can put out statements and be mad, but there's not going to be any further legal action. Dan will get away with the most damning details saved, but still a very scathing report that says, in our opinion, and this is, I think, part of the reason why he hasn't participated, right? Mary Jo White can say, it is my view, in my opinion, I think Dan Snyder did X, Y, and Z up to and including sexual assault on this plane in 2009. And then Dan can go, I never even talked to her. She doesn't have my side of the story. This is all a money grab. This is all this. And he can say the same BS that he said all along, which just isn't true. Right? This has never been about money. It has always been about accountability and transparency. And the proof is that Melanie Coburn and Megan Imbert and Tiffany Johnson and every single person involved here outside of the 2009 accuser who settled for $1.6 million soon after that 2009 incident, but refused more hush money payment when offered, according to ESPN, earlier this year. It was back in 2022, within the last 12 months, refused more money so that she could be able to speak on the matter to Mary Jo White. This has not been about money. No one has received money. This is not anything other than accountability. And it's important to remember that while it might seem to some people like, oh, these people are going after Dan, it's because they hate him. Why is it that they hate him? It's not because he made their football team bad. It's because he hurt them. Either directly in a couple of cases where there's direct misconduct against Snyder that is being alleged, or by employing people that hurt them, over the course of most of the 25 years that he owned the team. People from all different eras, all different decades, all different experiences, all along the same thread of that terrible man was terrible to me in a way that probably should have been criminal, but certainly is unprofessional, untoward, immoral, and not something that we accept as a part of our society, and something that we would not accept happening to us as good or any of our loved ones. So that is, there is no witch hunt. There is nothing other than, I like the words that Melanie uses, transparency and accountability, and we will see. However, there is something that Don also said in there that is very important. The league wants Snyder out at all costs. They just want to be done with him. Banks and Katz have made it so they can't just punt on the report. And obviously Congress is keeping an eye as well after everything that happened with their investigation. But it is important to know that as we transition quickly to this new Albert Breer story that dropped earlier today, the league just wants him out. So there might be small sacrifices made here or there to ultimately get him to go. Breer reporting earlier today that while no one in Washington needs to be concerned, there are some kind of concessions / tweaks that they're allowing and things that they're having to work through, including the 30% cash minimum, that the Harris Group may be taking on more than the allowable amount of debt to purchase the team, that all these things are having to get ironed out and they're willing to work on it because they want Dan out. And this is the fastest way to do that. What's interesting about Breer's report that is completely unrelated to anything we've been talking about is Breer thinks, and we've talked about this with Eben Novy-Williams, I've talked about this myself on the show, this is the last sale to ever happen like this. Just straight up, that's what it's going to be. I shouldn't say that definitively, because I guess the Seahawks could get sold specifically to Jeff Bezos under the current rules, and Bezos will have no problems. However, unless you're Bezos, unless you're the Walton Group, and you have the ability to pay $4.5, $5, $6 billion in cash, the current NFL rules of finance are untenable. You can't require 30% from the majority owner, 30% in cash, and all this stuff when the prices are this high. And so Breer reports, it's a fairly short report on the Monday Morning Quarterback site on Sports Illustrated, but the final paragraph says, this sale could be the one that changes how NFL rules read on buying a franchise, mostly because of the prices on the teams in 2023 have skyrocketed to the point where the potential pool of buyers is pretty microscopic. And if guys such as Harrison Rails aren't ready to pony up the actual cash needed to finish a sale like the one inside the NFL guardrails, that'd probably be a pretty good sign that change should be afoot soon. Again, nothing to worry about, just things that have to be done, ironed out, and ultimately this process will get done.
This is the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.